When you decide to implement virtual networks within Windows Azure, then you certainly need to make sure that your clients are able to access those resources. So the approaches that you can take do vary, but you can certainly set up VPNs so that your internal organization is able to access possibly all of the resources in any given virtual network. So there are two approaches with respect to your VPN options. You can either go with what's called the site-to-site virtual private network, or you can go with the point-to-site. So we're going to have a quick look at the two options and the differences between them, and obviously there are benefits of either one depending on your circumstances. So for starters, with the site-to-site connections to your virtual networks, what you begin with, of course, is your own internal organization. So we see our private network down below. And of course, we have our virtual network up in the cloud. So we need to be able to establish connectivity between these two sets of networks. So it still is just a pretty standard VPN, but again, it comes down to what type of VPN. So the first option with the site-to-site, you have to create and or configure an RAS server, routing and remote access server, or any kind of physical gateway. And there can be really anything that's acceptable with respect to your organization is fine. So Juniper or Cisco devices, just any kind of gateway within your environment set up for all of the outgoing connections. And then within Windows Azure, you effectively do the same thing. You set up a network gateway within the virtual network to establish the communications between those two endpoints. Now, once that's done, what you get is that all of the clients in the local site can access all of the resources in the cloud-based virtual network. Now, obviously, there's permissions and security and things like that, but it facilitates the ability for all of the clients to access all of the resources if necessary. This does also require an IPsec or secured IP, secured connection for encryption purposes, and you would want to do that in any virtual private network configuration, but that's your basic site-to-site. That might equate to something like a hardware-based VPN that you might have between your own sites within your own organization. The other choice is the point-to-site, wherein we're not so much concerned with every client being able to access all of the resources in the cloud. So we still have our internal organization, but rather than setting up an RAS server, we're just concerned with a few clients. Now, that can be really any number. It doesn't really matter, one or dozens. But it's more so just the clients themselves. So what we're not seeing is the RAS server within our own environment. They still want to be able to connect to the cloud-based resources, so there still is a VPN connection, but it's client-based. So they still access an Azure Virtual Network Gateway that you do set up and configure, but the simple difference being we're not concerned with creating and configuring a VPN endpoint within our own organization. So it's focused more on the clients. With that, we just have multiple client-based connections, however many as are necessary. And the key point is it's not network to network. It's selective. So you see that there are some clients that do not have access. So whatever suits your needs, it doesn't really matter as long as the necessary clients are able to access the necessary resources. Either approach works. Now, one final point with respect to that, we have the two options of site-to-site and point-to-site, but as of the time of this recording, the point-to-site feature is in preview mode, which basically means that it's not completed yet. So keep an eye out for any changes that might come along with respect to configuration options for point-to-site connections and some of the features and options that are available. So there might be some changes, and also with both of them, when you do want to set up your VPN configurations in Azure, it is something that you do want to set up at the time of deployment of the virtual network. There's very little, if anything, that you can do with respect to VPN connectivity after a virtual network has been configured. So you want to set this up at the time of creation, pretty much in both cases. Once those are defined, your internal organization is able to make the connections through to your cloud-based virtual networks.